quorum of the Rock Island City Council due to the disaster declaration issued by Governor Pritzker. Because of this order related to COVID-19 public health concerns affecting the state and the city, the mayor has determined that an in-person meeting at City Hall with all participants is not practical or prudent. For this reason, aldermen and staff may not all be physically present at City Hall, and physical public attendance at City Hall may be limited. This meeting can be viewed live on Channel 9 for Mediacom customers living in Rock Island or on the city's YouTube channel.
All right, roll call, please.
Alderperson Robinson.
Present.
Hurt.
Here.
Gilbert.
Present.
Swanson.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Poulos.
Here.
Geenan.
Here.
Mayor Tomes.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. First up for the is to talk about the American Rescue Plan, Sedona Group. If you wish to make your presentation.
Can I take this off?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Make sure I understand how the technology works here. All right.
You're too young to have that problem.
First and foremost, I want to thank you all for allowing us to come here tonight to present our process to assist the city with the development of a long-term community recovery plan, or LTCRP. What we're going to demonstrate here tonight is our invested corporate commitment, our highly relevant disaster recovery and federal grant management experience, and our federal emergency management-based approach that we will bring to this process and assistance. My name is Brendan John. I'm a program manager for STGS. I oversee our portion of the PA program. To date, I've overseen the deployment of over 70 technical assistance professionals to disasters throughout the United States. I am formally trained in the FEMA public assistance grant delivery model myself. With me here tonight, I have Ernie Chiash. Ernie's the president of Sedona Technologies Government Services, and he's our senior leader for all contract oversight and business development. Most importantly, we have Paul Ricciuti with us here tonight. We've proposed Paul as our program manager for this advisory and assistance. Paul's background in emergency management started with an appointment by the president as a federal coordinating officer while with FEMA. After that, he led disaster operations for Region 5, which encompasses the state of Illinois and other states in the upper Midwest. He's led 13 of these long-term community development projects, and most notably, he was the architect for the business process reengineering for the public assistance grant delivery model that was undertaken in about 2015 or 2016. Oh, I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Sorry, guys. So our invested corporate commitment is as follows. As a company, we have the CEO of the Sedona Group with us here tonight, Rick John. We also have Tracy Baker here as an employee of STGS as well. But I just wanted to point out that STGS is different than the Sedona Group. You hear Sedona Group around the Quad Cities. A lot of times you think, oh, all those guys do is total workforce solutions. We certainly do that, but we also are an IT service provider nationwide, and then STGS is an experienced government contractor with both nationwide and global experience throughout Europe. Some of the things we're working on right now, obviously disaster and emergency management, acquisition support and advisory and assistance for the Secretary of the Air Force, Army Sustainment Command located over here on the island. We work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Peace Corps as well. So when we developed our plan, we developed this in mind as, we are some of the end users for the process that's going to be developed in the long-term community recovery plan as well. To date, we have 9 internal employees that are Rock Island residents. We have our senior leadership, as I pointed out, are both Rock Island residents. So in the end, our recovery is your recovery. We can all share in this together. You stated 4 goals in the RFP. You wanted to create a financially sound city, providing high-quality services and infrastructure. Every day, we rely on those infrastructure services. Expanding the local economy. We support and are supported by the City of Rock Island and the businesses and entities within the city. We want to see the revitalization of strategic locations. Most notably, our business development manager from New York, from Washington D.C. is not here tonight, but he'll only stay at the Holiday Inn downtown Rock Island, and he'll only drink at Icon. So, so that's a good thing. And then, we want to see improved neighborhoods. All these things will lead to hopefully people moving back to the city of Rock Island. When we can grow population again, everyone wins in the end because we're growing the pie, we're able to better invest in our infrastructure and our services, and it's a self-feeding thing when we can, when we can accomplish some of these goals. So when we developed this project or this approach, we kept it obviously with the City of Rock Island in mind, but we wanted to keep local control and project management here. Obviously, I've talked about our experience here, our people here in town. Paul's a Davenport resident, so he's here in the Quad Cities. I'm a citizen of Moline, but I'm here on this side of the river. Ernie is on this side of the river in the city of Rock Island. Our PMO and our operations lead is here in the city of Rock Island. And the important thing is this is all going to be locally controlled and managed from people within your community, and most importantly, who have the skills and expertise to undertake this process planning. The main benefit of working with a company like STGS is, just our broad knowledge of the city of Rock Island, of this community. It'll improve our ability to identify key needs of the city. It's going to give an ability to, target communities that have been severely impacted by COVID-19 and help them rebuild. It keeps our risk management and costs at a reasonable level and allows us to leverage our relationships within the community. From being here, well, my dad was, lived here since 1957, so I'm pretty sure he knows just about everyone in the city of Rock Island anyway. But like I said, when we're working with our neighbors and we're helping our neighbors, it's, neighbors investing in neighbors, and, we know we can get the most out of this approach by being embedded here within the local community. There we go. So, the sole benefit in our disaster recovery experience is on the FEMA Public Assistance Program. Pretty much the sole purpose of that program is to help communities respond and recover from major disaster declarations like COVID-19. We bring advisory and assistance services to that program. We provide leadership and understanding in the coordination of federal grants and delivery. We aid, as I mentioned, we aid communities so they're able to quickly respond and recover from these disaster events. And we bring an operational understanding of laws and regulations, not only inside of FEMA Public Assistance, but the Department of Treasury, the IRS, and other federal agencies that oversee federal funding to local communities. Oh, and I was going to mention, if any of you have any questions while we go, please feel free to stop me. Currently, since we started the program, These are some of the projects that we have worked on. Currently, right now, we are working down in New Orleans on Hurricane Laura and Delta, Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Katrina, back from 2005. We've worked on projects that have obligated over $18 billion in federal funding to local communities recovering from major disaster declarations. The relevant, our key personnel have worked on these disasters. Paul was the director of operations. They sent him to the city of New York right after Superstorm Sandy to get commerce moving in that city again. And I'm sure he'll tell you it's probably a year of his life he wished he could get back. Some of the other ones, Hurricane Irma, and these are all projects that our key personnel have worked on over the years. So you might ask yourself, well, you all know a lot about FEMA public assistance, but, this is the American, Rescue Plan Act of 2021. How are they similar? Well, there's some similarities, certainly. Obviously, both federal laws. PA came out of the Stafford Act. This came out of the ARP Act of 2021, but they both provide financial and technical support to state, county, tribal, and city governments like Rock Island, private not-for-profits as well, provide funding and technical assistance to respond to and mitigate health effects related to COVID-19. They are all have the similar regulations in 2 CFR Part 200, administrative requirements and cost principles for federal awards. And they both fund infrastructure projects relating to water, sewer, and broadband internet. So, the primary benefit of using a company like ours or using our company to help you develop this process is, we have the capability and flexibility in adapting and applying federal governments to the needs of Rock Island. The key principles we are going to bring to this program, it's all community driven, as we mentioned. We're going to get a lot of public involvement, and because this is ultimately the city's money, we want to make sure every community in the city is counted for, while we go out and we develop our project list. Locally controlled, as I mentioned, and, focus on projects that have a lasting impact on everyone. So, some of the key things to think about here when thinking about a company like STGS is, what does this oversight get us? We can coordinate plan development. We can understand the laws and guidance. I've read through the executive guidance related to ARPA. There are some things that, we have to be mindful of when we're developing our project list. Some of the people that we are bringing to the table have also been studying up on the law. And, so it's, how can we provide that guidance to the city so we get down the line and, we've not made any mistakes with the money and, ultimately we don't have to pay anything back to the federal government. It's really where we come in on this. And then all that comes down to determining the eligibility of a project list, which we do every day on the FEMA Public Assistance Program. But I think a key, part of this coming from a small community like Rock Island is having a neutral third-party provider help us develop the process. We can avoid the sight of, external influences on project lists. We can, steer clear of favoritism or conflicts of interest as well if we bring in a data-driven approach that doesn't show favoritism one way or another. So as I mentioned, not only are we going to use what we, have learned on the public assistance grant delivery model, we're going to use some of the best practice FEMA has created with the long-term community recovery planning process. Basically this just, and I know Mr. Parker has very well versed with that, but, basically this provides a nice starting point and provides us a structure to develop our plan and our process moving forward. And, here are just the, some of the keys to it, which we can get into greater detail during Q&A if you'd like. So the key thing with these LTCRPs is, as I mentioned earlier, bringing the whole community on board to figure out how we want to spend this money and how it's going to benefit the best available return on investment, if you will. I'm excited to announce that part of this is developing a communications plan. Last week we signed a teaming agreement with a company called MediaLink out of Rock Island that if we get any work out of this and there is a need for a communications plan, which there will be, they're going to help us with that. They are experts in advertising, getting messages out, doing surveys. They can target people on social media, and I don't mean that in a bad way. We can, use electronic means and then, more traditional approaches. But I thought bringing on someone like Natalie from MediaLink to do this work should bring us a good insight on just collecting that data. And then what we decide from there is up to the city and up to the citizens. So in summary, there were some qualifications for this RFP. Sedona itself has 3 years working in disaster recovery. However, our key personnel in the roster of trained public assistance managers that we bring to the table have well over 100 years of experience. A lot of them have backgrounds in city planning, civil engineering, public works, private not-for-profit funding, and so on and so forth. Experience working in the Quad Cities, we have that in spades. We have been doing business here for, I think this year's our 35th anniversary, so, and we continue to be here for another 35 years. Some of our major clients here in the community are John Deere, Coney, Modern Woodman, Rock Island Army Sustainment Command. We are working with Augustana College on their FEMA public assistance and their funding streams that they're using to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. And then, we have extensive experience working with public outreach, not only internally as Sedona, but by bringing MediaLink on, we hope to really, drive that home so we can reach out to the whole community and, develop a great process that's going to have lasting impacts on the community for years to come. Anyone have any questions?
I do about your communication plan. So would this totally be handed over to MediaLink to actually create the communication plan, and what does that look like?
So I think that's a good question. So I think we have an internal social media team that will work with Natalie from MediaLink. However, in our proposal, we propose community canvassers that would be Sedona employees to go out and reach out directly to the community. It's something that I would oversee as part of the community management plan. So Natalie and I would work hand in hand in the development of this plan. She would do kind of the technical, more of the, the advertising and targeted social media stuff, because that's her bread and butter, right? But it would be more of a partnership than necessarily just, hey, Natalie, go figure this out. We would have oversight of it every day. We would look at the data, we would condense that down so it's, easy to understand, and then we would report back to, the city, the officials here, and any stakeholders involved with the process.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
You say you've got a lot of experience, and clearly you do. I've seen some of the events that you have been at, and, with FEMA, you have an easy access to data with the 201s, 204s, 211, 215. You know what players were where, how long they were there, how much it cost to keep them there, and what they were able to do. What metrics are you going to use to tell us, to give us the same data?
Well, that's a good question, but Tui, I'm sorry for the numbers you were mentioning.
Those are incident command forms that
Oh,
record
okay,
data.
gotcha. I'm sorry, that's a good question. Paul, do you have any insight on that being the?
If you could be up at the podium, please, that way some people could be listening in.
Sorry. It's 30.
So part of this will be collected through the Grants Manager portal that you have access to or will have access to, that manages, that tracks all those data points. It's what we invested in when I worked for FEMA to bring this, because we had the same problem with visibility of data, money, funding, eligibility. All that will be in this Grant Manager portal for you to extract in any data that you really need.
Thank you.
Questions? Good.
So it seems to me like your previous experiences is more in going into communities with natural physical disasters, identifying those things that have been destroyed or whatever, and then helping them go out and get funding to rebuild, basically.
Correct.
So how do you see this project, which is different because it's not physical per se, and it's not a rebuilding of buildings, structures,
Sure.
that kind of thing? So that's one question I have.
Sure, and that's a great question, but, I foresee this as, we are mitigating and responding and recovering from COVID-19. I would hope that if we are awarded this contract, day one, I would be able to get every one of you in a room again, because you guys have the heartbeat of the community. You all know who's in need, where the impacts are. I know you probably get letters, emails, calls every day from your constituents that are hurting after this. So that would really be our damage intake analysis, or, getting with all of you, the city directly, and coming up with, these are 10 of the things that we have to put together right now that seem to be, hot and heavy that we have to respond to. So, physical infrastructure or a health-related disaster all need visibility. They all need an intake of what the damage has been, and you can quantify that from, like I said, the emails and the notes you get every day from your constituents. So that's how I would approach it. That's how I would start it, in that manner.
Okay. Well, can I just follow up?
Go ahead.
If you want to, Alderman Robinson, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what creative options do you recommend for getting public input regarding, one, not just the impacts of COVID, but ideas for solving these identified problems, which would then ultimately translate into projects to aid in the city's recovery?
Sure. So, I'll admit I'm not the most creative person there is around. At the end of the day, I'll work as hard as I can to, and that's why I put in the plan that we submitted to the city. If it takes going door to door and, talking to community groups with religious organizations that know their communities, that private not-for-profits have a very good heartbeat on the city as well. At the end of the day, we can be creative or not, but not this in a negative way, but getting in people's faces to say, how are you impacted by this? Do the community surveys that we're going to create through social media. We have developed a website that we can either put on our website or the city can put on their website that we can, people can submit things that they would like to see in this long-term community recovery plan. Targeting through, as I mentioned, geofencing on social media, that we can go directly into the communities on the internet and put ads about the long-term community plan. And please submit your thoughts to rockisland.gov. There's a dedicated web portal for this.
I think one of the issues, and this is, maybe I'm just speaking of this by myself, but you had mentioned receiving data from us, from our constituents. That's one of the issues we have as a council, is we don't have that communication channel with our constituents.
Okay.
So that's one of the issues we're running into. Even you mentioning the social media campaign, we have a good number, especially in my ward, who are refugees who don't use social media.
Sure.
They don't use the internet.
Sure.
So what will be the plan going forward? Because you had mentioned earlier about being community driven. What does that look like?
So, the getting out, and I think in our proposal here, reaching out directly, and I mentioned it, getting in those communities in person. There's got to be organizations that are working with the refugee communities, working with them to coordinate a in-person meeting with some of these residents in the city of Rock Island. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, if you just pound the pavement a little bit, get down in those communities, walk around and talk to some people, that can be effective. Because like I said, as you mentioned, there's going to be some people that don't have access to the internet. They're going to be hard to read, through 21st century means, social media, the internet. But, identifying the stakeholders in that community, the people that matter down there, the community leaders is what I'm trying to say, striking up a relationship to them to say, hey, talk to your neighborhood about this. We'd love to come down and have a town hall meeting with this community. And I think that's going to be a vital thing, individual community town hall meetings, that we are targeting specific neighborhoods that we haven't got great feedback from, via internet reporting or anything like that.
If I can,
Go ahead.
well, real quick, if I can just add something
Sure.
to that subject, understanding that we're procuring the plan, right, that's ultimately what we're buying here, is
Sure.
help us answer those 13 questions that are associated with
Absolutely.
each step. Is it fair to say that before whoever, your employees, a subcontractor, a vendor, whatever, goes out and does the work of, collecting public input, that before you initiate that work, you will have drafted, okay, here's our plan for how we're going to collect public input. City council, does this look good?
Yeah, no,
A sort of iterative process, so that, your job is to develop how we're going to get public input. Not just, you guys go take care of this and get us public input, but what's the plan for developing public input? And then before you go and do the work of collecting the public input, checking with us and saying, that looks good, or, hey, wait, there's this gap over here, is that sort of?
Absolutely. We're here to advise and assist the council, the mayor's office, the city administrator in developing this whole process. So
Right.
I would hope to have regular meetings with the city council so we can, get your input on, what we're doing well, where we're missing the mark, setting up deliverables of, this is what this is going to look like if it ultimately comes to that.
Yeah. I think that would be, that's something that I would be looking for, is
Sure.
understanding a sort of an iterative process where before you start going and doing the work, double checking that we all are on the same page, relatively speaking, consensus that, okay, yep, that looks good, now go and collect the public input.
Well, absolutely, and it creates a two-way street, because if you're excited about this process, you're going to get your neighbors, you're going to get your constituents excited about this. So the more people we can talk to,
Right.
the more effective we're going to be in developing the plan, developing the process, and ultimately getting to an endpoint where we're all happy with, and doing it under the guidance that we have to do it under through the ARPA rules and regulations.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Two questions, two parts. Businesses, we talk about residents and everything else, but there's businesses that the business owners don't live in Rock Island and everything else, but the business is located here. So is there a plan to talk to those too? Obviously some of those will maybe the survey or electronics, but maybe a different approach, I don't know.
Well, that's a good question, because, we kind of cut the other way. We have a guy who lives in Rock Island but owns a business in Moline, right? My thought is, and like I said, I'm trying to be as agnostic as possible in this. I think if a business is in a city ward and it's providing jobs and it's providing services to the city, ultimately, I think that person's, obviously their input is highly valuable, and I think there's someone we should certainly listen to.
Mm-hmm. The other would be is that, I hate to speak for the council or anything else, but when we opened up these requests for proposals, or we all got a little bit of sticker shock looking at it. And, once again, maybe being naive on it, maybe, once again, it's kind of creating things new, at least for us. But is there areas that maybe you could see if we were concerned about, obviously, the dollars we're spending?
Mm-hmm.
We want to put as many of these dollars to work for the citizens as possible.
Sure.
That, is there areas that you think about that may be able to reduce some of that cost and try to get to close to if not the same results, i.e., I give an example, instead of going door to door, which could be labor intense, hold more town hall meetings.
Sure.
And gather those people at one time versus going to door to door.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate you bringing that up. When we bid this, we didn't really have we didn't have much to go off. I worked with Paul and other people I know who have done these in the past to say, it's a 6-month time frame. We want to get this. We want to get this done as fast as possible. What are the labor hours required with this? However, after talking to Mr. Tweed about kind of some of the things the city was actually looking for, we can certainly work with the during contract award. We can talk about utilization of resources and probably pare back some of those things that maybe you all don't feel, that are that vital to the approach. And so certainly willing to work with the city if it comes to it, absolutely.
Anybody have any other questions?
I've got my questions that I provided earlier, but I was going to wait. I didn't want to hog all the time. I'm gonna skip the first one because we pretty much already went over it. It was about public input, making sure disenfranchised communities are involved, but we've talked about that quite a bit. So my second one, it's important to me that the LTCRP process results in consensus amongst Rock Island's many diverse stakeholders, including everybody up here. Each one of us are very diverse in our constituents and desires and all that good stuff. What's your thoughts on building consensus? One of the steps is, identifying, prioritizing projects and articulating a vision. How do you get a city of 37,000 people to kind of say, okay, what's the big picture? How do we build consensus here?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Ultimately, I think it's going to come down to educating the benefits of these projects. And I know you've read the LT, you've seen the project works with, what's got a high project recovery impact, what's got a moderate, what's got a low, what's important to the community, what's not important to the community. Ultimately, I think if we can target projects that have a high recovery impact, that serve everyone in the community, and and ultimately get public support. I mean, if you have 1,000 people that show up for a town hall meeting because we're going to talk about these 5 projects, we know those are important projects to the community. Since we live in a democracy, I think at the end of the day, the most people who show up after we've educated everyone on the benefits of this process, we've done the public outreach to say, hey, show up, this is very important, this has an everyday impact on your life. I think that's ultimately by public support, hopefully, would be a good way to assess that, and then ultimately going through the project worksheet on, this is a great project, this is going to have great lasting impact, and then, relying on the city council to, go out and, sell some of these projects, and I don't want to put too much work on you all, but it's your city, you want to see your city rebuilt, and grow from this, so, I think that'd be a good way to go about doing that.
Sounds good, thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry to just do rapid fire here.
Oh, it's
but-
fine. I read the question. I appreciate you sending those.
Absolutely. So it's this process that we are developing here, it's important to me, and this is sort of not specific to the recovery, but sort of like, quite frankly, like a marketing opportunity. So I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but, how can we use the fact that Rock Island is the only community around here that's even considering developing a long-term community recovery plan? Most of our neighbors have already identified, well, maybe not most, but some of our neighbors have already said what they're going to spend the money on and whatever. I've been a big supporter of this idea of developing a long-term community recovery plan, but of course that's longer. How can Rock Island, as a community, as a city, use the fact that we decided to procure something like this as a badge of competence or whatever to businesses, to residents? We want to grow our community. So how can we say that, hey, if you want to live in a community that's competent and doesn't just rush into stuff, but actually thinks things through before we do it, then here we go. We did it.
Yeah.
So how could we, any thoughts on that? Again, it's not really your wheelhouse.
Yeah, no, and, thinking about that, I think at the, I commend the council, the mayor's office, with the foresight to put this out, because we see every day in our public assistance program, not every, you get your money, you go off, you repair whatever, but there's no foresight, and let's, to quote the president, let's build back better, right? I think you will be able to use this as a marketing campaign, when we've developed a successful strategy and a process. When the community sees, when we go out and we say, let's just say, broadband internet brought to you by the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, and now people have internet in their homes for the first time in their life. Things like simple projects like that, and the marketing of these projects could very easily be used to say, hey, look what we did with all this money, and we did it correctly, and we actually have something to show for it at the end of the year. I was amazed. The city of Davenport already had one, I believe, developed before this. They put out, but it was just a project list. I don't know what they did for community outreach. Maybe that was done previously, but I think when the city feels together on something, when everyone's going to come together and build this thing together, I think that's going to be great for civic relations. And who doesn't want to live in a city that, has good civic relationships and has people who legitimately care enough to want to put one of these things together, so we just don't squander this money and we're not looking around at each other in 2024 like, well, where'd all that money go? There's going to be cities that's going to happen to. There's going to be cities that are going to misspend this stuff, and that's going to be a problem. I don't know how that's going to get handled, but the fact that you guys have the care and the foresight to want to do this is very commendable.
Thank you. Last question. Basically, how do we make sure, or how can we hit two birds with one stone? We've got plenty of plans on the shelf. Most of them we don't even, most of them are just sitting there collecting dust, quite frankly. But we got plans on, economic development, we got plans on public health, we got plans on stuff relative to this, housing. Where do those come into this process so that in addition to recovering from the pandemic, we also mark some check marks off of these plans that have been collecting dust?
Yeah, so, and you mentioned it earlier, but, maybe Rock Island be the only city that does this, but we have the county of Rock Island who received money this, and I haven't seen what the county is going to do with their money, but you have a Rock Island Development Corporation here. You have private not-for-profits here that serve vital community interests. There are other federal funding streams that you can pair with this money. It's not, and the gentleman that is a key personnel on this, Michael Korkel-Baumgars, was the head of community development for the state of Minnesota for 17 years. He said, look, we gotta, and we can talk about it in the plan, but it's not hard to say, how do we take this $27 million and turn it into $72 million? So that would be part of what we look at, or where are other funding approaches, where are other things that we can to look at to pair this money with. An easy one, and I just came to my mind the other day, maybe, like I said, I'm agnostic on this. You spend the money what you want to, but something I thought of, the president last week announced that he was raising the cap on disaster recovery loans for businesses to $2 million. It's like a 2.2% 30-year loan. Now you can refinance bad debt, old debt. But why wouldn't we spend, and like I said, I'm not suggesting that, why wouldn't we spend a little of that money to educate the business owners, and business owners might not know about that. I'm sure the city has spent money mitigating, I know you guys have spent money mitigating COVID-19 impacts. I just see the PPE you have to put up, things like that. I don't know if you've, looked at trying to get public assistance help, because that's other things we can get money for, we can make applications for, to pair this disaster money with this ARPA money to turn $1 into $2. So,
We have about 5 minutes. I don't mean to.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Overall, we have about 5 minutes because we got another presentation. So.
Sure.
Yep. I'm not trying to cut anybody off.
I thought I was going to take, 10 minutes, and that was going to be it. I'm glad you told me it's 45
No, you're
minutes.
fine. Go ahead, Judith.
So I think there's some concerns, especially from our constituents, about spending this, once in a lifetime inheritance to hire a consultant. And I'm thinking, okay, we need to write the plan for how we're going to get public input, then get the public input, then compile that, then figure out a process for identifying projects, then figuring out how to evaluate which projects, and then figure out which projects to choose. But I did like what you said about you have experience in getting additional money, because that would then temper, I think, their resentment at spending 2% of our award
Sure.
on hiring a consultant.
Well, and think about it this way. The labor market right now is extremely difficult. I don't know if the city wants to go out and hire 3 or 4 full-time employees or add to additional duties of full-time employees for a project that's only going to last 3 years. And then what do you do with those employees when the money runs out? So one way or another, you either make the investment by hiring a consultant or bringing on full-time staff, which in an extremely expensive labor market right now, I don't know if I would do. Or you just throw the money out the window and we don't know where it went 5 years from now and everyone's upset. But I think this can't be looked at as necessarily a cost. It's got to be looked at as an investment, and bringing in a company with the technical knowledge to lead the city through this, I think could be explained to constituents that we're not going to squander this money because it is a once-in-a-lifetime award.
Can also leverage maybe with other local entities too,
Oh,
school
absolutely.
district, county, et cetera. May be able to work with them too, and some funds.
Okay.
Can't hurt to ask.
We can try.
Can't hurt to ask.
Well, and I have the people that know how to do it, so.
That's right.
You know.
Any other final questions? All right.
I
Thank you very
appreciate it,
much.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that was it.
Yeah, it's open meeting. It's a public meeting.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
That's fine, Rick. I answered anything. I've been called worse. Evening.
Good evening. My name is Linda Waston, and I am representing Waston and Associates, and thank you very much for inviting us to be here this evening. I'm going to start a little bit by just kind of reminding you of who we are and our qualifications and what we do, and then talk a little bit about the goals that we see for this project and the process that we anticipate, kind of how we plan to walk you through the process, and end with why we think a consultant makes sense for this project, and of course, why we think it should be Waston and Associates. Want to thank you for inviting us here this evening, and if you've got questions as I go along, by all means, please interrupt. So as I said, my name's Linda Waston, and my bio is in the proposal that I had sent, but just wanted to highlight the fact I am the founder and president of Waston and Associates. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary on August 1st, and have been in the Quad Cities the whole time. My background is in communication, so I approach this project from a communication standpoint. So some of the questions that you had about how do we get the community engaged, how do we help encourage them to have a consensus on that, those are communication questions. And so we start with the values. We're going to always start with what your mission as a city, what your aspirations as a city, where do you want to go? When we can get consensus on that, it helps us get consensus on the projects. And we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically in just a few minutes. My doctorate's in higher education administration, and why that's relevant is I have a lot of research experience. I've done this data gathering. I've done the surveys. I've done the focus groups, and I do them myself. And I do a lot of that through strategic planning. I've been doing strategic planning for 17 years. And when I went back to look, I have facilitated strategic plans for about 40 community organizations, many of them right here in Rock Island, and in the proposal it talks also about what some of those are for local government and government entities as well. And I've got about 35 years of nonprofit experience. I've developed these kinds of programs to solicit input, to make these kinds of decisions. And at the same time, I've also written more grants than I can count, trying to get that kind of revenue, and can help you get the revenue to expand your 27 million into be more millions as well. The Waston and Associates team, I am in charge as the president. I've got my husband, Ron Waston, who is a professor at St. Ambrose, who helps me with a lot of the leadership program. He's on here because as we're doing focus groups, as we're doing listening sessions, I foresee him kind of being the second person who could facilitate those simply from a time perspective. Lynn McLaughlin is my director of research. She does tons of research, mostly internet-based kinds of research as opposed to going out and seeking that input. That input would be Ron and I. Abby Davidson is new on our team. She does all of the administrative work. She is dynamite. We would subcontract with Amanda Jeffrey and Heather White for doing the marketing piece. Ron and I have the communication background to do the messaging. What we lack is kind of that implementation phase. We know it. These guys are much better at it. And so we would be working with them to say, okay, what's the best way to get this message out? And then you see the little blanks at the corner, our TBD subcontractors. Depending upon how we decide to go about doing this, how many listening sessions we need, we do have a whole cadre of other people that we can call on to facilitate focus groups, to facilitate listening sessions, et cetera. That would depend on how many we're doing, how many are concurrent, and those kinds of things. So this project has 4 goals, the way we understand it, and the way I pulled this together was to say, how do we meet these goals? First thing we need to do is identify community needs. We need to make sure we're keeping the community informed at all steps in the process. We need to develop a fair, open, and equitable process. And the goal in the RFP stated you want to transform Rock Island. You want to make sure that in 4 years when this money's gone, you have a very different Rock Island than you do today. So how do we go about doing that? Let me talk a little bit about the process that we envision. This is kind of an overview. And when I looked at the 13-step plan from FEMA, these really do intersect with the things that they say. First thing we have to do is we have to clarify what are the city's aspirations. Where do you want to be in 4 years? That gives us a target. It gives us something to always point at, and it gives us kind of our North Star. Everything else then gets evaluated in terms of that. We say, does this move us toward our aspiration? If not, we're done. If it is, then we can evaluate it further. So that really becomes the first and probably one of the most important steps. The next thing we do is we start to identify what are the community's needs. And I'll talk about this in a little more detail in just a minute. But that's saying, why aren't we at our aspiration? Because if we were, it wouldn't be an aspiration, right? It would be our definition of today. The next is probably the most important step. What's stopping you from achieving your aspirations? If your goal is to have, for example, the best business community in the nation, why aren't you there? What's stopping you? And it's out of that comes the guidelines for the plans that you want to solicit and that you want to fund. So that really becomes the first criteria when you're evaluating between Plan A and Plan B. Will it get you to your aspirations? Then we're going to develop a process to solicit those projects. We'll develop a process to evaluate those projects, distribute the funding, and throughout all of this, we'll keep the community informed. So let me talk about each of these then in a little bit more detail. First thing we're going to do is clarify your aspirations. We need to, as city council, as the mayor, as city staff, you need to agree on what's your goals. Is it that you want to transform the city? Do you want to get back to where you were? Do you want to impact everybody a little bit? Do you want to make a life-changing impact on just a few people? All those are laudable goals. We just need to figure out which is yours. And we do that in a couple of ways, and Dylan, you mentioned some plans that are already on the table. We start by reviewing those and saying, what have you said are your plans? Because it doesn't make any sense to scrap those and start over, right? It makes a whole lot more sense to build upon what you already have, or at least to evaluate what you already have. So we would start by looking at all of those plans. We'd also obviously review the FIRMA and American Recovery Plan Act to say, what do they allow you to do to make sure we're not going down an avenue that we can't go. And then I see a lot of this in discussion. It's reviewing these, we would give you a report that says, here's what we see. Is this jive with what you think? Let's prioritize these. Let's make sure that we know what's on top. When I facilitate a strategic planning process, one of the things that I do a little bit different from a lot of the other people that I've seen do the process is really force the group to prioritize. I've worked in organizations, I've been on boards where the strategic plan is 20 items long. And you cannot focus on 20 things. So I always make them focus on what's your top 3. Now, they cheat. 3 becomes 4, we combine 3 and 4 together, and, there's lots of different ways we get there. But it's really an exercise to say, let's really focus where you want to be, and that's one of the things we would do here. And then out of that then becomes your community data gathering. So the next step becomes identifying your community needs. And here is where there's lots of different opportunities. The way we've done data gathering historically is we do listening sessions or focus groups, one and the same. We could do as many or as few of those as you want. We also, I love to do surveys. We can do surveys of your constituents. We can talk about what's the best way to get those out. How can we get those out, both via SurveyMonkey, which is my favorite way to get them out, but how do we also get them to people who don't have the technology? And we've got some ideas, and we would talk to you about how do you reach your constituents, maybe through non-electronic means. I also think it's important to review objective data. I worked on a strategic planning process one time, and someone was adamant that we've got to put in the plan XYZ. This is a real problem in our organization. And we looked at the objective data. It wasn't. It was actually the strength of the organization. So you have access to a ton of data. And just because something's impacting me, right, just because my road is awful, doesn't mean all the roads in the community are awful. So we want to balance that with some objective data. Out of that would come a report to City Council and to city staff saying, here's what we heard in the community listening sessions. Here is, here's the themes, here's the data, maybe it's a list of, here's the top 50 things that we heard, or the top 20. And then it would start to say, okay, how do we match these up then with your aspirations? And that's the next step. And this is probably the most critical step because this provides the foundation for your plan. What is stopping you from achieving your aspirations? You want to start matching your goals with your unmet needs. So if your top goal is to be the best business climate in the country, and you are, you don't need to worry about that, right? It's done. But if you're not, then you start to say, well, how important is that? And why aren't we achieving that? And is this something that these funds might be able to help us to get closer toward or to achieve our aspiration? And then we need to narrow them again down to your top needs. $27 million is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when you look at what all the needs are. So how can you prioritize it? And there's a lot of ways that you can do that, and a lot of that would come out of what's the plan. We would get this step done through a series of conversations, through a series of meetings. If we're working together, we're going to get to know each other very well, because we're going to be having conversations a lot to say, let's figure this out together. It's my job to ask the questions, to bring the data, to come back with more information, to push when it needs to be pushed, sometimes to stand back when it needs to be stood back. But at the end of this, we'll have the strategic goals that will drive your plan and that will help to drive what's this process going to look like. Then we have the plan, and we've got to figure out what's the best way to solicit projects. Now, I'm a fundraiser by trade. I'm a grant writer, been writing grants for 35 years. My head goes to an RFP process. And that's certainly one of the ways in which we could solicit projects. It's not the only way. But this is where, depending upon what comes out of what are those goals, that's going to start to identify who are key stakeholders. If we decide we need to boost up our business economy or our business sector, then our businesses are going to become key stakeholders. If that's not a priority, then they're less of a key stakeholder. So we've got to identify who those people are. And then we need to create a process that's going to ask them to submit their solutions to it. And this is similar to what I did when I was on the board at Komen Quad Cities, where I developed the RFP process to solicit grants, asking them, how are you going to solve breast cancer? And then created that whole process to get public input. My bias is always inclusion, My bias is always more and more input. And so certainly, if you decided that you wanted all of you to decide between the projects, we could devise a process to do that. I would tell you all the reasons why I think that's a bad idea. Ultimately, it's your decision, and we would move forward. My goal would be to figure out how can we get as much input as possible. And I've designed those processes, I've run those processes before. That's something that I'm very familiar with. And we also need to talk about how are we going to communicate what those solutions are. And I'm going to talk about communication in just a minute. But, you know, it's important that the public understand what you want to get out of this project, out of this funding, and why. And so it's communicating that back out to the general public, but also making sure that if you want to get solutions from, for example, the business community, you're reaching out so everybody who's in the business community has an opportunity and knows that they could submit their projects. And then we've got logistical details. Are you going to give out the money once and give them 3 years? You're going to do it every year? You're going to do it twice a year? All those become logistical details that we need to figure out. At the end of that, we have a process by which you're going to solicit funding, both internally and externally, because there may be some city projects that want to be part of this, and we need to figure out where do those fit in. And we could, for example, if we've got 3 priorities, you could divide the money up and say it's going $9 million to each priority. Or you could just say, we're going to throw it all in a pot and just see what comes out. All those are the kinds of logistical details that you're going to need to figure out. Then we need to evaluate those projects. And the evaluation process is also part of that plan. We need to figure out who's going to make those decisions. And I mentioned that before. You guys could be the ones to make the decisions. I'm going to tell you why I don't think that's a good idea. If you want to solicit broader input for that, we talk about who is that? What do those committees look like? How do we solicit those committees? And again, I've done those kinds of things as well when I was with Quad Cities. By what criteria do those decisions get made? We need to have some kind of a rubric that says what's most important to you. Is it more important the number of people that you touch or how deeply you touch them? And that's not an either or necessarily, but how do you evaluate that? How do you evaluate the impact? How do you evaluate the need? So putting together some kind of a rubric to help people make that decision in a fair way and in as an unbiased way as they possibly can. How do we discuss the proposals? Once people weigh in and evaluate them, do we just do it on the raw score, or do we have a discussion? That's another one of those questions that we need to ask. And I already mentioned we had to weigh the depth and breadth of the solutions, how many people they touch and how deeply they touch them. Out of this is going to become your list of projects for funding. My assumption is that whatever process we go through, first of all, we're always going to make sure everything fits the criteria and are legal, obviously. But my assumption is also that you all have the final say in approving that final slate. Phase 2 is distributing the funding. Just going to touch on that, you know, in that phase, it's a check distribution process, a reporting process, some accountability and evaluation steps. When I was at St. Ambrose for 14 years, that's a lot of what I did, was grant accountability on that side of the equation. I've done that for some clients now, and for some of the other organizations that I've worked with. And public accountability is important at that step too. Finally, I want to talk about communication, because communication is critically important throughout this entire process, because you've got to make sure if you want to have public buy-in, if you want the public to support this project, this process, and the projects that come out of it, you need to communicate early and often. It's not just, oh, by the way, this is what we're funding, because then everything that you aren't funding becomes fodder for them to disagree with. So some of the places where I noted where you especially need to solicit that input is at the initial stages, when we want to get people to give us input, we're going to need to reach out to them. We're going to need to explain to them what we're asking them, why we're asking them for that information, what we're going to do with that information. And I'm a firm believer that we do this through natural networks. You had talked about, some of the underserved populations, and I think you had as well, right? How do you reach the people in your constituents who are immigrants, who are refugees, who maybe don't have internet access? We find who are the community leaders, who are the influencers, and we ask them to gather them. And sometimes we might ask them to actually facilitate the focus group if we think they would have better luck getting that information from the people that we're looking at. Maybe we do it in a different language. I've done that with a couple of organizations that I've worked with. It happened to be Spanish in all those cases, where they had a very large Spanish-speaking population. We found someone who could facilitate the focus group in Spanish. Another time we had a translator. That was interesting, with me speaking English and them speaking Spanish. Another time we did the survey in Spanish. And so we can do that, and with the goal is always, how can we get the best input from people in a way that they are most comfortable? We also then, after those sessions, we need to communicate back to people. I think one of the most damaging things you can do is ask people for input and not tell them what you did with it, and not show them where that came from. And some of it is acknowledging that, yes, we appreciate that we heard X, Y, Z, but here's why we're not going there. Here's why that's not a priority for us. And you do that by focusing on the similarities, on your vision, on what do you want the city to be in 4 years, in 10 years, in 40 years, and how are these funds going to help you get there? And if you can get agreement at that level, on the values level, then the other things fall into place a lot more easily. You're also going to have detractors, and we have a plan for how do we manage those detractors. We're going to need a lot of communication around the project solicitation process. Here's how we want to solicit your projects. Here's the process that we're going to go through. If you're going to have other people reviewing them, we're going to need input on, we're soliciting people to review these projects, et cetera. We need a lot of communication then. We're going to want to communicate what's come out of it. What are you funding? And why, and where did the money go? That becomes another important communication step. And then the ongoing report of impact. And the impact's not just check mark, yes, we did it, we said we were going to have this program, and we did, but how did that impact the lives of the people of Rock Island? And how does that help move you more toward your goals and your aspirations? How are you a better city today than you were yesterday because of these funds? And there's lots of other communication in between. These were the main points where I saw that communication was going to be critically important. Couple final thoughts. Why hire a facilitator? Yes, you could hire some staff. Yes, you could do this on your own. But one of the things that bringing in a facilitator gives you is first objectivity. It's not my plan, it's your plan. I don't have a dog in this fight. I certainly have opinions. Certainly the fate of Rock Island impacts my life as well, and I want Rock Island to do well. But one of the things that I bring is the ability to ask questions. Some of them might be those stupid questions that everybody knows the answer to, but when somebody comes from outside and says, why is that important? You kind of go, well, of course that's important. But why? And it makes you think a little bit more. So I can bring that objectivity. Also an expertise. I bring that expertise in research, in focus groups, in developing planning processes, and implementing those processes, and coming out with some very good strategic plans out of that. And I can focus attention on this project. You all have a city to run, and I'm thinking that's probably a full-time job, and then some. And so adding this to your plate becomes something else you have to think about. It's very easy for those things to get pushed aside. I get to be the nag who says, let's think about this. Or you go, oh crap, we got a meeting with Linda coming up Friday. We need to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, it's a way to kind of keep focus on the project. So why should it be Weston and Associates? We are a small, local, women-owned company. I'm a certified women-owned company in the state of Illinois, if that's important to you. You saw pretty much our staff. There's one other employee. So you're going to be working with me, and you're going to be working with the staff. We've got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. As I said, I've been facilitating strategic plans for 17 years. I facilitated the strategic plan for St. Ambrose. I've done it for 40 other organizations in the community, large and small, public, private, municipal, lots of different organizations. Well, I come with a kind of a set idea of how a strategic plan can run. That's not set in stone. I'm not going to force you into my model. What I'm going to do is say what works best for you. In general, we start with focus groups and then do a survey out of them. I've had clients who, for one reason or another, we go, let's start with the survey. We don't know where to go with focus groups yet. We've got some where we skip that step and we do other things. So, I'm not going to force you into that model because I've got the knowledge of the theory behind planning that we can adjust and anticipate and adjust to your needs and make sure it fits your needs. I've completed similar projects. The proposal outlines these in a lot more detail, but I'm currently working with the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs and helping them for the second time create their statewide plan for that department, which is looking at arts history and film programs for the state of Iowa. Also working with them to help develop a process to build the humanities in Iowa. And part of that will also be developing a grant process for them as well. City of Bettendorf, one thing I did when the company first started is we did visioning sessions for the city of Bettendorf. We had 89 people over 2 nights. First part of this process, but that was something that I had done with that city, and I've mentioned Coleman Quad Cities and how I worked with them to develop their grant process. We're flexible. I'm not going to force you into our model, but we will have some conversations, and through those conversations, we'll come up with the model and the plan that works for you, and we have the capacity. This is something that we could jump in and start whenever you're ready. So with that, I open it up for your questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Good, that's fine. Someone's got to start.
So how would you collect, I think in your proposal, you mentioned quantitative data, and what quantitative data do you see would be relevant for this particular project? And if you could also explain the internal research that you would be doing.
Yes. Some of that internal data is going to depend upon what are your goals, right? What are your aspirations? So some of that data might be, what is the unemployment level in the city of Rock Island? How many homeless? What is your level of poverty? What is, how many low-income housing units do you have, et cetera? And some of that, I've got access to some of that. My guess is you've got much better data than I do. So it's asking the right city personnel to pull some of that data. The other quantitative data comes out of the survey. And so that's more opinion data. So it would be things like, do you think housing is the most important project or problem that the city of Rock Island faces? You would get that quantitative data back to say 93% of your constituents think that's a problem, as opposed, compared to only 85% think it's streets and 75% think it's sewers. So that would be the quantitative data that we would pull.
Well, you answered a number of my questions that I had sent to you, or I had Randy send to you before the presentation, during your presentation. One that you didn't really hit on because it's not particularly relevant to a strategic plan or a long-term community recovery plan is that discussion with the previous presentation about how do we use this decision to procure a long-term community recovery plan as a marketing badge or whatever. How do we use the fact that we did this as indication of why people should live in Rock Island or you should have a business in Rock Island? Any thoughts to that.
Yeah, I think you start to incorporate that thought and that idea into your talking points and city staff talking points, and you make sure that whenever you're in front of the media, you know, you incorporate those things in. And you never bash anybody else, but you point out the fact of, here's what we did, and here's the outcome of that, and here's why that makes Rock Island a good place, a better place, without saying that these other places aren't so good. And that's part of the things, that's part of the messaging that we can help you with. And there may be some strategic avenues to also get that message out to the public in other ways. My strength is in the messaging. It's not in the getting it out part, but I know Heather and Amanda have some very creative ways to help get that information out, and that's what we would, that's how we would do that. It's also part of the ongoing communication. As people see that, you know, every week, every month, you know, you're talking about, you're asking them questions and you're sending them back information, it's much more important that they see your actions, don't hear your words, that they'll start to go, wow, the city really cares about what I am doing. And people in other cities will start to go, wow, they're asking their people what they want to do. I didn't want that in my city, but I didn't have an opportunity to say that. So a combination of your actions and then making sure that you appropriately pepper that message into all your communication would be how I would do it.
Thank you.
So in your proposal, you said you have, and you mentioned tonight too, you have experience in survey construction. Do you have any examples that we could review?
Yes. I'm thinking of what? Yes, let me stop there and let me think about what, you know what? I'm doing no, I'm not doing that one yet. I just closed that one. I was going to say I will be doing one for the city of Moline, or for Moline Public Library. I just did one for Davenport Public Library that was out in the public. And so I can send that to Randy and have him get that to the rest of you.
Linda, it's been said that we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And I think what I'm hearing from you in the previous presentation is that this council must contend with that balancing act of relief and recovery. And the Treasury guidance is written very specifically for cities that choose to do lost revenue. It sidesteps the guidance of the Treasury, and the Treasury has been very clear that this is a time for a game change for cities, that we actually have the ability to invest these funds in an equitable way, that we can change the game so the same players don't always win and the same players don't always lose. And to do that is to creatively look for those systematic areas within the community that can be addressed and have significant investment. What is your experience in reaching the alternative parts of the community that normally don't get looked at?
I will tell you, every strategic planning process that I facilitate and every discussion I have with the people like you all as we're planning a strategic plan says, who do we want to reach and how do we want to make sure we're reaching all of your constituents? My favorite constituent to reach are the negatives. Right? So I mentioned that I just did a strategic planning process with Davenport Public Library. I want to hear from the people who use the library, and I want to hear how much they love the library, but that's not very useful. I want to hear from the people who don't use the library. That's the hard constituent to reach. And some want to invest that time and invest that money to do that, some don't. When I facilitated the process for Bettendorf Library, they went to Hy-Vee one day and handed out surveys to try and get that. So that's one avenue of doing that. And my interest from that comes out of my dissertation. My dissertation asked people who didn't give to their alma mater why they didn't give. And I found that was a lot more instructive than asking people who did give why they do give. But it's also making sure that you are reaching into those communities. And so I mentioned that we did a focus group with the Sacred Heart that was Spanish language, because that was important to them. That's the one that had the interpreter. When we did the health plan for Coleman Quad Cities, we knew that a huge area of need where there was a lot of breast cancer was with the Muscatine Hispanic community. So we found a woman down there who spoke Spanish. There was a group of Hispanic women that already got together. We said, hey, can we do a focus group for our purpose at one of your meetings? And they did, in Spanish for us. So that small example there. I'm working on completing a process with the YWCA of the Sauk Valley. They have a lot of outreach, again, this is Spanish, in migrant workers or immigrants, and so we put the survey in Spanish. So those are some of the ways I've done it so far. My thought for this one, because I think you want to go further, and I want you to go further or to go deeper, is to identify who are those community leaders, who are the churches, where are the groups that you want to reach, where do they naturally congregate, and who do they naturally look up to. And if we can have those leaders on board, and if we can even have those leaders perhaps facilitate that focus group like we did with the Hispanic woman in Muscatine, I think we will get much further. And it's going to take some trust building, and that trust building has to happen from within, not from without. And that's the approach that I would take, and some of that's going to be identifying who are those groups that you want to reach, what's the best way to reach them, and how can we make sure that we are doing this in an inclusive enough manner that everyone can participate.
And from personal experience, when you led our Rock Island Heart of Hopes through their strategic plan, I was part of that as a funder, and you were very strategic at making sure we had a good diverse around the table.
Yeah. Some of it's as simple as what time of day do you have them, right? If you want people who are not doing this as part of their workday, you're going to do it in the evening. I'm not a morning person, but sometimes you got to do them at 7 a.m. to catch people before they go to work. If childcare is an issue, maybe you offer childcare for an hour so people can come. So it's trying to identify what are the potential barriers and what are some of the ways that you can start to overcome some of those. I've had clients, when you mentioned Heart of Hope, reminded me where they gave out gas cards to people who came, so that the cost of getting there wasn't a barrier, or a Hy-Vee gift card if we were trying to attract lower income individuals. So there's lots of ways to do that. The question becomes, who do you want to reach? What are their potential barriers? And what are the ways that we can try and minimize those barriers?
Any further questions from anybody? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I have a question for our city attorney. I can't remember all the exceptions for going into closed session, but is there one to discuss the hiring of consultants?
There's one that is employment-related, but I don't know specifically off the top of my head that it is for hiring of a consultant. I'd have to pull the statute and take a look.
Okay.
So I don't know for certain.
I just know we were going into executive session anyways today.
That's exactly, I was going to ask the question. Go ahead.
I can get that answer before, we can have a few minutes here. I'll just walk over to my office and come back.
Yeah, I got them right here.
Okay. Because otherwise, I'd just like to know if there's any other discussion, otherwise we'll adjourn this and go to the city council meeting, but we do have to obviously some point talk about this and come to a conclusion of how we want to proceed forward.
Right.